housings during the shutdown. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission said that they found flaws in 17 of them, but no leaks. In addition to the 2 resident inspectors, the NRC has had specialists observing the refueling outage. One of them is focusing on the flaws they found and will evaluate how the company.
Fukushima, an ongoing warning to the world, by Amy Goodman with Dennis Moynihan. She is in Tokyo. I write these facts as dispassionately as I can, in the hope that they will act as a warning.
Global level and start to promote the peace and a sustainable society.
The Japanese population is increasingly opposed to nuclear power, with Fukushima and the meltdowns at the plant. Katsuya, finally, talk about nuclear power. And just this week, as we're here, the government has announced they're going to push for more plants, nuclear power plants.
About Fukushima. One person who has diligently pursued the facts is Christina Consolo. She's the host of Nuked Radio. Her website is fukushimafacts.com, and she is on the phone with me right now. Christina, welcome to True News.
Well, a lot of us were expecting to see some type of issue with people that fly for a living, because the radiation levels up in the jet stream right now are extremely high, and they have been for the last 14 months. From Santa Monica to Michigan in December and recorded 60 times over what it should have been in the air. So, people that are
talking at all about what is happening in Fukushima. So they're not going on a record saying anything, but the Japanese government is lying. They have not told the people the truth.
Their nuclear experts did not feel that harmful levels of radiation would reach our shores. And what we found from Freedom of Information Act requests that are posted on a website called Informable, the gentleman who has been requesting all of the transmissions between the U.S. government, the Chinese, the Russians, and the Japanese from the beginning of the disaster till now, and that includes NRC transcripts of phone calls. They were well aware of how high the levels were and that they were coming over here. In fact, infants in California were exposed to 40,000 becquerels of iodine-131. That causes thyroid. Our storms are generated out of this huge radiation slick that's off the coast of Japan. And this all gets rained out over the west coast of Canada and the United States. And this has been going on for 14 months. And I have an inbox just full of people whose pets are losing hair, whose children are sick, they have lingering illnesses. The doctors are trying everything that they usually do to try to, they're diagnosing them with allergies, and they're diagnosing them with bronchitis, and they're treating them endlessly, with inhalers and all the things that they would usually put people on for these types of problems, and they're not getting better. And people are really getting desperate for answers, and this is a problem across the entire United States, but most of all in the Pacific Northwest. They've been getting hit the hardest since it began.
So from Alaska down along the Vancouver, Canada region into Seattle, Portland, is that the main zone that's getting the worst?
Yeah, but it's all the way down to Southern California. In fact, they detected cesium-137 and 134 in the pollen that was being released a few weeks ago in Southern California.
In the pollen?
So these trees have, they uptake cesium through the water supply. It goes into the trees, and now it's being re-released in pollen from the trees in Southern California. And they had predicted this would only happen in Japan, but it's actually happening here.
Christine, what about milk? Do we have any reports of elevated levels of radiation in milk?
Yes. The EPA was testing milk at the beginning of the disaster. The EPA did testing for about 2 weeks and then said the levels were dropping, and they shut off all their tests. They stopped testing food. They stopped testing rainwater, soil, and and they haven't resumed that testing, but independent labs have been. In fact, UC Berkeley reported in November that the levels of cesium in cow's milk are actually 150% higher than they were in April of last year. So what I've been telling all my friends with little kids is don't drink cow's milk anymore. Don't let your kids drink it. Use milk alternatives like almond milk, coconut milk. Coconut milk is also very high in potassium, so that's good for you because it helps plaque down. They get stronger as time goes on because radiation is cumulative. Unless you have the cows start ingesting something that aren't even aware that this is going on. I mean, they're starting to become aware because there's so many people that are starting to really speak out about it.
Christina, you have sources in the nuclear industry in the United States who are privately telling you that America is already so contaminated that the nation needs to be. I mean, you're saying that they're telling you that the radiation levels are so high that this country needs to be decontaminated. Did I hear you right?
That's what they have been telling me since December. However, since then, the USGS posted those soil samples that they took back in April of last year, and they already showed high level of contamination, especially in LA, Portland, and Boulder. And that was from April of last year. Now, this has been ongoing. We've had, since then, 14 more months of rain and weather and wind blowing that stuff over here. It's settling on the ground, settling on the trees, and it's starting to show up in plants all over the country, especially dandelions. Plants that grow fast and uptake a lot of water are starting to show some very strange mutations. In fact, we started a page on Fukushima Facts and on Facebook called Mutation Watch, where people can go and post images of weird stuff that they're finding in their area. And what I'm doing is I'm relabeling all those images with the date the image was taken and the location, and we're sending them to researchers so they can put them in their studies that they're doing, their lectures that they're doing, so we can get this information out to the public. Look what's happening when you see a dandelion that's as big as a baseball bat with, 6 or 7 heads on it. That's not normal. Here from Belle Isle in Detroit, from Dearborn, Michigan, from Bloomfield Hills. And what really concerned me is last summer, I started noticing all the pine trees around here started turning red and grew, because I know that was a problem in the Pacific Northwest. But pine tree beetles that attack and kill pine trees actually leave tracks on the bark, these little tubes that they make. And so you can tell if it's an insect infestation that's killing the tree. These are not pine tree beetles. This was widely observed around Chernobyl. It's called red forest syndrome because pine trees are notorious for cesium uptake. And so one of the first trees that show damage are pine trees. And just today I drove through a very exclusive part of Oakland County, Michigan called Bloomfield Hills. There's 100-foot pine trees there that are completely red. And it occurs in clusters because that's how fallout comes down to the ground. It's called a leopard spot pattern. I mean, we've done all this research for 25 years around Chernobyl. We know what radiation does to the environment. And everything that they have noted there is happening here. And if you know what to look for, you can see if it's happening in your area. Now, you're located in Florida.
Yes, we're on the Atlantic coast.
You're actually probably in the best state in the entire country to not be affected by this, because the jet stream hardly ever dips as low as Florida. And we have had some readings from Central America and from South America at times where they're getting pretty high spikes, which is possibly from Fukushima also. And
in Central and South America?
In Central, South America, and even at times they've measured it in Australia. In fact, I had an email last night from someone telling me that koala bears are starting to lose hair down there in the zoos.
Do you know where in Central and South America these reports have come in from?
Brazil.
Okay.
And in Central America, it was from a person who was on a Facebook radiation watch page. There's a group of several hundred people that have all taught themselves how to measure radiation and are taking readings throughout the country. And this was from a woman who was traveling through the area and taking readings as she traveled.
Mm-hmm. Well, would the Brazil case be because of the southern jet stream?
Well, sometimes the upper-level jets will go down to the southern hemisphere. And they said at first that the radiation from Fukushima would probably only affect areas of the northern hemisphere. First they said it wouldn't even reach the U.S. The particles were too heavy, they would fall in the ocean. Then they found out that wasn't true. Michio Kaku, who's a famous theoretical physicist from New York, had said that the radiation from Fukushima had gone into the southern hemisphere. This was like 2 or 3 weeks after Fukushima happened. It was already being measured down in Australia.
Is there a safe zone anywhere in the world?
Well, the southern hemisphere is safer than the northern hemisphere. Florida is probably the safest state in terms of the entire U.S., or Puerto Rico. But we're really being exposed to it everywhere, even though it's at very low levels. You have to remember this is something that's going to be ongoing for at least the next 30 or 40 years, because that's how long TEPCO has said it's going to take.
How about the Caribbean islands? Anything? Have you had reports from any of the islands?
I've had people contact me asking if there was anyone doing ratings in that area, and I don't know of anyone in that area that's doing them.
Is reactor number 4 the most dangerous part of Fukushima right now?
Well, it's dangerous in terms of the building. The structure is very unstable. The seismicity of the structure has been rated as 0, meaning even a small earthquake could cause the building to collapse. And at the top of that building is a spent fuel pool that contains 1,500 fuel rods. Some of them are MOX fuel. Some of them are brand new nuclear fuel, extremely radioactive, that were supposed to go into reactor 4 on the morning of the earthquake, because that reactor was under maintenance. So we have this full spent fuel pool that's sitting at the top of this reactor. And if something happened to that reactor and the pool fell onto the ground, the rods would start fissioning and possibly catch fire or explode. It could then start a chain reaction of the other spent fuel pools on site, the other nuclear fuel that's on site that's still left in the other reactor buildings, because there are 6 reactors at Fukushima. You only hear about 4, but there's actually 6 there.
And what would happen if a fire ignited in these fuel rods?
Well, we would be subjected to an extreme fallout situation where we would have to shelter indoors for a period of time, possibly a couple months, if not longer.
You're talking about worldwide?
For the northern hemisphere.
The northern hemisphere would have to go indoors for possibly several months?
Yes. And researchers, Helen Caldecott, who is a former pediatric physician who taught at Harvard, and Arnie Gunderson, who runs the Fairwinds site, who's a nuclear expert who does consulting. He used to actually work for the nuke industry until he became a whistleblower. He's one of the only people who have been putting out information on Fukushima. They're prepared to evacuate their families to the southern hemisphere if that happens.
Wow. That's pretty heavy stuff.
And that's why there's so many people, the people that do know about this, who have stayed informed, who have, conducted their own research, are very upset because people aren't being told. And there's very easy things that people could be doing to protect their children right now and their own health from this contamination. And all it really means is just living very healthy, eating all whole foods, filtering your water, avoiding rain and precipitation. and taking supplements. There's certain foods that help protect people from radiation, like seaweed. The people around Hiroshima that ate miso soup every day had relatively no cancer, had lower cancer rates than people in other parts of Japan. And that was after the Hiroshima bombing.
But the seaweed, Christina, wasn't contaminated at that time. What do we do now when the Pacific Ocean is contaminated?
You need to pay attention to where you buy your seaweed from. And there's actually, you can get North Atlantic seaweed, Norwegian, kelp, and there's a few people out in Oregon that are starting a huge aquaponics business where they grow all of the food and fish indoors, and they're going to be doing indoor seaweed farming.
Okay, so seaweed, miso soup made of seaweed, will help your body block the radiation if you consume nuclear radiation. What other foods?
The other foods that are really good for you are avocados, dates, and nuts because they contain iodine. In fact, you can search out, the top 10 foods that are highest in potassium, the top 10 foods that are known for anti-cancer properties, and work as many of those foods into your diet as possible. And I tell everybody, treat your body like you already have cancer. Get lots of sleep. Use lots of spices when you cook, and certain spices have anti-cancer properties like turmeric and rosemary. And you just have to become an advocate for your own health.
Okay, now you mentioned eating whole foods. When we're eating...
Cooking from scratch, that means no fast food and no processed food.
Mm-hmm.
And eating lower on the food chain, because the higher you go up in the food chain, when you get to animals, that's where the radiation will be concentrated.
Won't there be radiation on fresh vegetables and fruits?
Yes, from fallout. And what you do is, and what I do and have been doing for a year is, when you get home from the grocery store, you wash all your fruit and vegetables, and you put baking soda in the water that you're washing them with, just a couple of tablespoons. I let it soak for like 20 minutes and then just rinse everything off and put it away, and then I know if my kids go to grab food that it's all clean, because I've measured radiation on lettuce, on romaine lettuce from California. In fact, I bought celery the other day that was mutated, and I sent it to a researcher, and I said, here, I thought I was doing good eating salad all the time. Look at the celery. And the celery had an obvious mutation in the bottom of the stalk. And she said, she wrote me back and said, what the people in Chernobyl did was they only ate food that grew underneath the ground, like potatoes and carrots and beets, to limit their exposure. That's pretty drastic. But you want to start thinking of becoming more of a vegetarian maybe than you already are, eating more plants. I mean, our bodies are more, adapted to eating plants anyway. There's a really good book by Michael Pollan called In Defense of Food that talks about why plants are good for you anyway. But now in terms of the radiation uptake, it's the best way to go. And, I had steak today for lunch, but it's probably the only time that I'll eat meat this month.
So
I do it kind of special occasions now, where we used to eat meat, 2 or 3 or 4 times a week.
I have shared with my radio audience that in the past year, not only did I stop drinking milk, but I've pretty much cut out all meat. And now I'm looking back and I'm realizing, I'm understanding why this feeling, this impression came on me a year ago to become a vegetarian, to eat more raw food, to do away with dairy products. It didn't make sense to me because I've never been that, I've just never been interested in being a vegan. But all of a sudden, that thought came on me. My wife went that direction, but I wasn't connecting it to Fukushima until recently. What about our exposure to rain?
Well, we've had, I actually, last summer, and this was before when I was just researching Fukushima, and I didn't think about this really till a few weeks later. My dog ran away during a thunderstorm, and I was out in the rain trying to chase him down, and it was me and two dog catchers, and we all got soaked, and when I got back to my house, I had a rash all over my arms. I thought, that's really strange. I didn't run through the bushes or anything like that. And I took a shower, and I took Benadryl, and the next day I was fine. But about a month after that, my daughter got caught in the rain, and she actually got a burn on her skin. And we took her to a Japanese dermatologist. We found out that the radiation levels in that rainstorm were about 10 times over background that were measured in a city just north of me. And they did a biopsy of the area and said that she had a burn, but they couldn't test her to see if it was caused by a radioactive particle. So I started doing fallout forecasts and talking to some researchers and some atmospheric experts about what they've determined, what they've learned from atmospheric testing that was done in the 60s and how fallout occurs. And we used to have the Civil Defense Department, which was broken up into DHS and FEMA when we did away with it, but all of their research is still online. And they did, extensive research on how fallout comes down in the rain, because it floats around in a very dynamic part of our atmosphere called the troposphere, and that's where all of our storms are generated out of. And the rain, there's an electrical charge to these particles that attracts them to snow and forms around them in rain and brings them down to the ground. So rain is the most dangerous time to get exposed. You should be avoiding all rainfall, but if you do get wet, all you have to do is take a shower and use baking soda when you take a shower, because baking soda is what the military uses to decontaminate soldiers in wartime or when they're exposed to any type of bomb testing in the past. Baking soda and bentonite clay, which is a component of kitty litter that you can actually buy ingestible kind, actually binds to the radioactive particles and neutralizes them. And some people ingest baking soda as like an anti-cancer.
So are you just in the shower? You're just putting baking soda on you and just using it?
Yeah, you're just mixing it in with your soap, or like if your kids take a bath, putting like a cup or two in the bath water with them.
Does it neutralize the radiation, or does it absorb it, or what is it? What's it doing?
It neutralizes it, and it's very inexpensive. I mean, you can get a huge box at Costco for like $30 that would last you a year. And I wash all my vegetables in it. I wash my pets in it. When they get a bath, and my kids use it if they ever, because they're all in college, and so they're walking back and forth to class and so forth. So occasionally, when they get caught in the rain, as soon as they come home, they just take a shower and use some baking soda to decontaminate, because we don't want anyone to get a burn like
is there
my daughter did before.
Is there scientific evidence that baking soda has this effect on the radiation?
Yeah, it's what the military uses. You can search it online. There's all kinds of documentation, and they use it to decontaminate soil also. But it's not good for using in your gardens because it changes the pH of the soil. So what they recommend there is mixing clay. If you're growing vegetables outside, that you mix in clay, calcium, and magnesium, and potassium-based fertilizers. So your plants will uptake that instead of radiation or radioactive particles.
How do we filter our drinking water?
The best way, you can go low cost or high cost. Low cost, and probably a lot of you in Florida do this already, is buying your water from the grocery store, from that reverse osmosis machine.
Yes.
It's like 22 cents a gallon if you bring your own container, and it's run through a series of filters. Activated carbon binds to radioactive particles and neutralizes them also. So you can use like a Brita pitcher at home, because they detected radiation in our water supply, back when Fukushima first started. And I haven't seen any recent tests. I actually have a company that's building a gamma spectrometer and scintillator for me to start doing food, water, and soil and rain tests, because the equipment is like $15,000 a machine.
But you would also need filters on your showers.
Yes, and that would be the high-cost option, is if you've got a system for your house. It's called reverse osmosis. A lot of people that have well water have these. And it's almost like a hot water tank, but it fits under your sink, and that's what everyone in Tokyo is using now, too, and it filters all of the water in your house. Because it is difficult to, lug these gallons of water back and forth from the grocery store.
Christina, if going back to the reactor number 4 nightmare scenario, and this type of catastrophic event happens, and people in the northern hemisphere are ordered to stay indoors for months. What about the food supply on the outside when this emergency is over? What are people going to eat?
That's a good question. Anything that was packaged before that happened, the best food right now is if you can still find food that was packaged prior to Fukushima happenings, prior to March 11th of 2011.
So we're at the place that we now want to go to stores and say, I want to buy your old food.
Living really healthy. I'm not quite as worried about what I'm eating as much as I am my kids, because children are much more profoundly affected by exposure to radiation than adults.